It's giving me the option to continue or leave the meeting. Which one should I continue, I guess? Well, good evening. Welcome to our weekly gathering and session. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Old Testament. Last week, we spoke about the Bible in general, what it is and what makes it, what makes the Bible what it is. Today, the focus is on the Old Testament, as we notice in Father Hopko's series. Tonight, I'm going to do something a little bit different than what we've been doing before. Before we've been, just like summarizing the main points Father Hopko writes in his book. Today, the reason I want to do this is because in Father Hopko's books, it's more about the Old Testament is more about speaking just the general structure of it. Like, here's the first book, here's the second book, here's the different parts of it. But I do want to hit two birds with one stone. This is important to know what are the parts of the Old Testament, but also it's very, very important for us to know as Orthodox Christians, why is it important? More of relation, more than just structure. What is the Old Testament for us? What was it for the people in the before Christ? And how can we use it, or should we ignore it, and all of this? So I do have Angela. I don't know if I can share screen, but I will. I'm going to share screen just to explain a little bit about the Old Testament as a structure, and then I'm going to play. Like I said, it's the first time I do this. I'm going to play an interview with a priest. His name is Father Dr. Harry Pappas. He's an Old Testament teacher at St. Vladimir Seminary. He's been a priest, if I'm not mistaken, around not less than 35 years at least. I'm not me. But around this, but it's his specialty. He studied, so why not hear it from the source? It's part of an interview that he conducted, part of a series of videos to also learn about Orthodoxy and basic Orthodox teachings. In it, he answers those kind of practical questions about the relationship of the Old Testament with the New Testament. Why is it important for Orthodox Christians now to keep reading the Old Testament or relying on the Old Testament, of learning about Christianity and learning about Christ? So we'll try. So it's a few questions that he gets asked, and then he answers them. So what I'm going to try to do, play the video, and then after each question, we can stop and comment on, and if there are any other questions, we can see if we can answer them or discuss them. Okay. First, I do want to, like I said, I want to start by sharing the screen. And here we go, screen share. We can do this. All right, we go like this. All right, this, it is basically an introduction, like I said, about the Old Testament. Old Testament tells, let me just make it a little bigger. The Old Testament tells the history of the people of Israel. The Old Testament tells the story and the history of the people before Jesus Christ. Before Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the second of the Trinity, the Word of God becomes human and takes flesh and dwells among us. So the Old Testament, again, is about whatever happened before the birth, from creation, technically, from the creation of Adam and Eve till the incarnation of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This history is based on their faith, on the faith of the people of Israel, or when we say Israel, not of course, we don't mean by it, the current state is the chosen people, the people of God. The history is based on their faith in God, and God, and on their religious life as the people of God. The authors of these books wrote about what God had done for them as a people and how they were to worship and obey God in return. we'll see there's a big part of it, a law, God telling people what to do. There's a big chunk of the Old Testament history. This what took place, this what happened, this person saw this person, this nation attacked this nation, all these kind of like historical events. And then we have proverbs and teachings like do this, don't do this, or a good man should act like this, or stuff like this. And then at the end we have what's called the prophets. Prophets who are like people who got the grace and a blessing from God to speak on his behalf. Not only we said before that prophet, that does not mean a prophet is a person who just foresee the future. It is part of what he or she does. And we've had through the Old Testament many prophets and prophetess, female prophets. And not only they spoke about the future, but also they spoke about current things, like God speaks through them. So they'll go and speak and tell up the people like, well, God wants you to do one, two, three. I'm telling I got a vision, or I got God told me to tell you one, two, three. So we'll see all these different parts. If you're looking here, we'll see that the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Let me see if I know them all بالعربي. تكوين, خروج, لاويين, أعداد, Tathniye, at least the name of them in the Arabic. Those first 5 books, they are called the Torah. Okay, the Torah, Torah, which means law, basically. There is another word for it, a Greek word for it, and it's called the Pentateuch. Pentateuch, as you see it here on the screen. And Pentateuch, well, why don't I do this? I think I can do this. It's much better, probably. Let me see. Okay, let me just open the whole page. It's probably better. Okay, so the Pentateuch. Can you give me another word that might start with Pent that we just heard about it like a few weeks ago? We celebrated it on a Sunday.
Pentecost.
Pentecost, bravo, exactly. Pentecost. Pentecost is from 50. Pentateuch is from 5. So at least the number 5 was involved. And he's basically on the Greek name of those first 5 books. Just also, we'll have those answered and we'll talk more about it. When we hear the interview, but history tells us, or the tradition tells us, that Moses wrote those 5 books. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That it's referred that Moses wrote them, although almost every single Orthodox theologian or historian through the centuries can basically say that most likely it was not Moses, and it was written like a little bit fairly after Moses, but it was contributed to Moses because of his importance in the history of the salvation of the people of God in the Old Testament. But again, like we learned last week, at the end of the day, it's not who wrote it, although that was a huge thing in the history of the church in the old days. It was very important, like, oh, if John wrote something, people might not take it seriously, but if Nick wrote it, it's like, okay, now we'll believe it because somehow we trust Nick more than John. And that was the mentality through the old ages. Nowadays, the church is kind of like, no, even in the old, like the early church never cared. They did not include the letters of St. Paul just because, well, St. Paul wrote them. It's just because of the content of what whoever wrote them, even if it was St. Paul or somebody else who claimed, and put St. Paul instead of his name or her name. So again, the first 5 books of the Old Testament are written traditionally, we say, by Moses, but there are a lot of theories that he's not the one who wrote them, and somebody after him wrote them. And we know, I can throw it from now, we know that the first five books came as a one book, basically, um, around 800 something, 870, if I'm not mistaken, BC, before Christ, around the time of the of the second exile, the Babylonian exile. But the point is, now I just, before we go into more a little bit details, the first five books, it's the Torah, the law. We talk about creation, and then basically God little by little introducing himself to the people. And then of course we have with in Genesis, we have with Abraham, who's basically the first one to establish God, God's kingdom, if I can say, on earth, and start spreading his teaching. um, uh, that's And then God revealing himself to these, to the people, little by little. Here's who I am, of course. And then we have something very important with Moses, the Ten Commandments, and then the laws, actually the more laws in Deuteronomy. And so the second part are what's called the history part of the Old Testament. And if you can see, it's basically starting with Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First Samuel, Second Samuel, First Kings, Second Kings, Chronicles, First and Second Chronicle, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Okay, and then and in those, like, literally history, especially about how the establishment of the kingdom and kingship. Nowadays we have kings, King David, King Solomon, but it's also those books, Joshua till Esther, they're literally, I mean, we can always learn from them something, but they're literally more of like historical stories. This nation attacked this nation, this person, killed this person, this man did this woman did this, all of these just like historical events. Basically all these like historical events. And then the third part, we see it's wisdom and poetry. You'll see in Father Hopko's book, he basically separates wisdom and poetry and makes them like two separate ones. Totally fine. It's just nothing, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just sometimes you might see them like together, wisdom and poetry, like in one section, or sometimes you might find them two different ones, two separate ones. And then we have Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastics, and Song of Songs. And it's literally wisdom, like we learn of things. We learn a lot of things of how like to act as Christians. Of course, we have Psalms, which is, by the way, like I said, mentioned multiple times, the Psalms are the backbone of the Orthodox worship, of the Christian worship. It is the book of books, of hymnography. Everything that we do in the church now is based on the book of Psalms, and the reading of the Psalms and the meaning of the Psalms and the interpretation of the Psalms. Job, we all are familiar with Job, Ayub, and it's very interesting in the book of Job. That's the first time we hear about, like, it doesn't, I mean, I don't want to say, I want to be very careful how to word this. We see how uh, God's or bad things might happen to very righteous people. And that's the first time ever that we see that kind of approach. Before all these books, all these before, from Genesis to like Esther, it's more about like, oh, well, this person was bad. That's why, he got punished with this. Oh, this person did something very bad. Oh, well, that's why God did this to him. Or this guy, or this woman or something died like this. Or, she turned to, Lut's wife, like, oh, well, she turned to a wall of
Oh,
salt. Thank you, Deacon. I can't even remember the word salt in English now. Lord have mercy. Um, uh, because, well, she did not listen to what God told her. But then with Job, we see this like most righteous, best man ever, like didn't do anything wrong, and all of a sudden he's just like hammered, if to say the least, with all these like problems and like very bad situation, to the point not only he lost everything, like materialistic, but also he lost his own family. So this is like kind of an eye opening. It's just like, whoa, what happened? What kind of God that, like, did God like let him let go of it, like he just gave up on him? And what, so this is a very new like kind of approach in the Old Testament that we have not seen before. Of course, Psalms, Proverbs, like I said, we learn a lot about what to do or what not to do, to wisdom, like what's good to do, what's not good to do. So, and then the last part, which is the major and minor prophets, the prophecies, and we have a list of from Isaiah down to Malachi, and we have very, we'll listen in the interview, we'll listen more about like a little bit explanation, but something to keep in mind, that we have major prophets and we have minor prophets. Like Isaiah is definitely one of the very major prophets, Hosea also, Jonah, and basically with these prophets, they, like I said, they spoke about the word of God. They spoke, they were messengers, they were messengers from God to his people. One of the major one, of course, and if I can say the main prophet in the Old Testament, of course, beside Saint John the Baptist, but at least the ones who lived before the time of Jesus Christ, is Isaiah, who's by a lot of Orthodox or a lot of Christian scholars considered him, if I can say, the fifth evangelist. And why do he's called, or he has a title of fifth evangelist? It's because what he wrote, a lot, I mean, most of his writings, most of his book is based on foreshadowing the coming of an incarnated Messiah, like the Son of God or somebody from God coming and becoming like the new Messiah. But it was something different about him. It's not like, because technically David is the Messiah too. King David was somebody who was appointed the Messiah, like we say, a Messiah, somebody who's like appointed to lead the people. But with Isaiah, we see that it's not only he's a human, he's just like more than, he's not just a human. So he talks a lot about Isaiah, and then we see in the New Testament a lot of reference, from Isaiah, used in the New Testament talking about Christ. So in general, or in total, we have 39 books in the Old Testament. 39 books in the Old Testament. But if I can say, and we'll listen more about it in the interview, between Orthodox Catholics and the Protestants, we don't have a very like the Gospels. Basically, we know there are four Gospels. Every single Christian group who claim they're Christian, they usually have they believe in the four Gospels, all equals. But among the Protestant, Catholics, and Orthodox, we have kind of like disagreements. Some of the prophets and minor prophets in the Old Testament, for some Protestant groups, they deny them, they don't accept them, they don't include them in their books, they have their reasons. And even, I can't even go further, so even in the Orthodox Church itself, we have like the Russian Church might not consider all these books as like, or include them all in their versions of the Old Testament. In general, Orthodox, like I said, it's very like it just, we cannot just say, well, everybody has 39 books and that's it. There are Christian groups who believe that there are more books and they include them in their Old Testament section, and there are Christian groups who basically take out some of these because they just feel like they're not important, or there is something wrong with them, that we should not include them. As Orthodox, as Antiochian Orthodox, like the Greek Orthodox, we believe that all of these 39 books are acceptable. We have more ones that they're very reliable, if like a better word, other ones that we just like, there's nothing wrong with them, we say, but like it's not like we're, it's like very like we take them as first resources. You know how like in sometimes in colleges you'll say, you'll here's your first reading, like first recommended source of reading, and then here's your second, source of reading. So we consider them as of like a second source of reading, not as important as the first one. We do not like shun them out in a way, but we include them just, also to learn from them, but they're not as important as the other major ones. Any questions for now? I don't see, because I'm sharing the screen. I only see Deacon Nick, Eleni, and Neife.
I'm watching it for you, Father. Keeping an eye, hopefully.
Nothing yet.
Okay. So,
Father, can we get a copy of at least some of these pages, especially the one with the Bible, the different books, and you can just send us a copy?
I can email you this one. Honestly, like I said, this one is just like I gathered them from online, and I'll just like tweaked a little bit here and there and stuff, but I can share these with you. I can definitely share them with you, and I will definitely send you the also the interview as a link, so you can just like also listen to it more or have it for your reference and go back to it. And actually, you'll see it's a YouTube link, but it's beautiful. You'll see about the New Testament. You'll see about liturgics, divine liturgy, all of these like 28, 20, 35-minute, like you can listen to them like whenever, learning, get to know like the basic stuff. So here is basically the following chart shows the different groups of books that make up the Old Testament. Like we saw the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. History, Joshua till Maccabees. Poetry and wisdom, Job till Song of Songs. The wisdom of Solomon. Major prophet, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Baruch, Ezekiel, Daniel, and then we have the minor ones. Although Jonah is minor just because his book, if I'm not mistaken, is only 3 chapters. Only 3 chapters, but that we read it in its entirety during the year. You know when? Job, the book of Job, is like we just talked about it, like it's Ayub, book of Kitab Ayub, and it's basically about like the suffering of like a servant who had done nothing in a way, right? So when would you think the appropriate or like kind of it makes sense to read it?
Somewhere during Lent.
Bravo, during Lent, and even closer to when?
Crucifixion.
Bravo, and push it another day.
Resurrection is the next day.
No. So well, in between, Holy Saturday.
Okay.
It's read, and I know this year we done. Remember when we threw the anyway. So the point is, it's read in its entirety that day, because at the end of the day, we're like, like this Christ who has done nothing, and look what kind of suffering he's going through. And then it's like basically the same story as Job, but that's why we read them in 3, like literally we read every chapter. Basically, there are 3 Old Testament readings, and we read chapter 1, then chapter 2, then chapter 3. And anyway, that being said, you can move the second one. Bible is not one book, like we said before, but a library of 66 books in general between the Old and New Testament over a period of more than 1,500 years, written by more than 40 men. 1,500 years. Like I said, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, the Torah, were written around 800 something AD. BC, before Christ. At least they got, they were collected as one book, and then little by little they started like to be written, with the till even like they got translated a little bit before the birth of Christ to Greek. Well, here's the thing: the major and the main language of the Old Testament is what? Is Hebrew, and we have a lot also in Aramaic. A lot of her writings were in Aramaic. And then around, if I'm not mistaken, 70 BC, 70 years before the birth of Christ, Greek basically scholars translated the Old Testament from Hebrew and Aramaic to Greek. And why Greek? Because at that point, Greek became the language of, if I can say, of the world. Like now we have English as the language in the world, like the common language in the world. Back then it was, around, 70 BC, it is the Greek language, and that was translated, there. Why this thing is stuck? All right. So out of the 66, let me just do this. Out of the 66 books, 39 were written before the birth of Jesus, of course. Moses he kind of showed up around 1500, 1400 before the birth of Christ. Abraham is around 2000. Not all these dates, like no one can say that's it. Definitely in the year, 2234 BC, Abraham was born, or we just don't know. We assume through studies, through archaeological findings, through interpretations, through, really, looking at other literature at that time, then that's how they're trying to figure out the dates. 39 books, they're called the Old Testament. Moses wrote the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, around 1500. Pentateuch, look back from the death of Moses all the way to the beginning of the world. Genesis chapter 1:11, creation, first human family, spread of evil, worldwide flood, division of mankind. Genesis chapter 12 to 50, God chooses the fathers of the future nation of Israel. And then we have now like kind of, we'll get like preparation for the kingship and the kingdom. Books 2 to 5, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Exodus well, we can say Exodus Khuruj is the most important event, if we can say, in the Old Testament, of course, after creation. But in it, Exodus is basically the liberation, is when Moses led his people out of Egypt to the promised land, because God finally has heard their prayers, and because we're done. We cannot just live like this anymore, and God has listened to them and then liberated them. Leviticus, obligations of the covenant. It's more in Leviticus Lewiyin. It's more of like the priestly doings, like the priest at that time, what they needed to do and not to do, like don't eat pigs, don't use this blood, you can't do this. It's like more of like altar stuff, churchy altar stuff, if I can't say. Numbers increases laws and time in desert, more about like what was happening in the desert, and some laws that Moses have gotten. Deuteronomy, Moses gives meaning of the covenant. Creation, Kings, and then books 6-17 are books of history written by various authors. 1400, 400 BC, possession of their land, establishment of the kingdom, and captivity and return of their land. Of course, now we have David, who united the kingdom, and then after him, Solomon, and then how things start going down south, if we can say. Again, all of these, just like, it's good information, but I do want to get to the more important part, like what is the Old Testament for us anyway, or what do we need to get from it? Joshua, conquest of the promised land. Judges, settlement and survival in the land. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, history and fidelity of kings who followed David down to the end of Jewish monarchy. All of this. 1st and 2nd Chronicles, period from Saul to return from exile. Ezra emphasizes Jewish piety in the Torah in the face of Hellenism, because nowadays, now at that point, Ezra, like, the rise of the, Greek Hellenistic, empire with Alexander the Great and before him, and so. And then Job, books 18:22, books of poetry and wisdom. Job is about man's question about suffering. Psalms, collection of poems put to music, but like I said, they are also the backbone of our faith, of our hymnography and of our worship. Proverbs, a collection of short, wise sayings. And basically, Proverbs, we hear a lot. If you come to Vespers, or if you listen to the Vesper service, anytime there's an important feast of Christ or the Theotokos, or a major feast of saints, martyrs, or hierarchs, in the Vesper service, we read 3 Old Testament readings, and sometimes 2 out of the 3 are from Proverbs. And basically to show how those people, how those saints actually listened to the teachings of Proverbs, and they were wise by following those wise sayings. Ecclesiastics tells how to live life in a world where all is vanity. Anyway, just a Song of Solomon poem about true romantic love. Song of Solomon's, it's not very, we read it also in some feasts, but also there's it's a language of like romantic, if I can say, erotic love. The 23 to 39, basically the major and minor prophets. Now we're kind of like coming toward, heading toward the New Testament, or the new era, the birth of Jesus Christ. Throughout the history of Israel, various prophets predicted that someone from Israel will one day be the savior and king of the world. And actually, that's what I have, at least for these. So, and like we said about Isaiah, about Hosea, of course, Elias, all of these, Jonah, all of these books that we, that we read about. Okay.
Other question about Solomon's poem. Is it spiritual love, or is it just romantic love? I think it's more spiritual love than romantic love.
Well, it's both, if I can't say. It's, when you read the language of it, some of it is like very romantic, to say the least. Some of the wordings are just like very, like, the way, you know what I mean? It's just like, whoa, like that's how much they would express their love. But we see it, we need to look at it in a way, and there are actually books written on this, like literally books written on the songs of Solomon. It's just because it's just like too much of it, literally, erotic love in a way. But in a way, we need to look at it as like, when you're so loving this person, like, when you love your spouse, or like this kind of love that you really, when in the Old Testament says that two become one, it just, in a way, the same way you want to love God, if I can say. But don't forget, this is the literature. These are written, none of the books were written just outside of their time. In a way, they were written for specific literature. That's what was going on during the during the time that they were written.
Yeah, I don't know how to translate that. I read a book in Arabic, and the title was Al-Ishq al-Ruhi. So that's
that's one way to, like, literally, in the end, that's why some of the passages we just don't read. They're in the book, we cannot deny them, we can just like pick and choose, but like we don't read them in our liturgical life or liturgical services, just because. But it's just like when you're like loving somebody, and this is basically the way we want to love God, that we just love him, we want, as if like, it's almost like as if he, like, as the way we love our spouses, and just like imagine like all the birds, whatever, your stomach feeling all these like whatever it's called, like when you're like, you see somebody like you just fall in love with, in like, so we want to have that kind of love with God in a way. I don't know if I can explain it. I don't know what else, it's just in a way, it's, you want to love God as if like it takes your whole being. You don't think about anybody. It's like, when you're first in love with somebody, I mean, when I was 13, probably 14, when I had that, like when you first fall in love with somebody and just like, you just keep thinking about them 24/7, something like, what I mean? It just, so it's like, this like first sight love. So you want to be like this with God, if I can say that, you'll just takes over your thinking, and you don't know, like you're only thinking about God, and you're only thinking about like how to be with God, the same way you just want to be with somebody you love so much that you can't see the world without this person. And the same thing now, you don't want to see the world without God. I don't know more of this, what we can, but anyway, that's the Song of Songs, or the Wisdom of Solomon. Any questions about this? Well, now I can see everybody else, like at least, Auntie Rosalie, Jamel. Welcome, everybody. Anyway, so I'll, any questions about this, or I'm gonna jump to the interview, and then we have those questions about like the importance of the Old Testament. Let me first just get it ready. Here it is. Share. Put this one down and get this bigger here, and this like this, and can you hear well?
Television series entitled Discovering Orthodox Christianity. I'm Stacey Spanos, your host for these programs, which are designed to explain the basic teachings of Orthodox Christianity. We're honored to be filming at the Holy Cross Chapel on the campus of Hellenic College, Holy Cross Greek Orthodox
Oh, now the internet does it.
School of Theology in beautiful Brookline, Massachusetts.
By the way, this is where I, went for seminary. This is where I met my wife. This is where we get engaged. We got engaged right outside the chapel, and that's where we got married. It's a very dear place for me. I spent like 10 years there.
And we know that you'll learn so much about our faith and traditions. So today's program will discuss the Bible in the Orthodox Church, specifically the Old Testament. Our guest on the program is Reverend Dr. Harry Pappas, pastor of Archangels Greek Orthodox Church in Stamford, Connecticut, and adjunct professor at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Seminary in Yonkers, New York. Father Pappas is a specialist in the Old Testament, having earned his PhD in the subject. So thank you and welcome.
It's good to be here.
First of all, who wrote the Old Testament, Father Pappas?
Traditionally, the Old Testament was written by the prophet and lawgiver Moses, the first 5 books, then by other figures as the prophet Isaiah, the king and prophet King David, Solomon, his successor, and many other of the prophetic figures and wisdom figures that are recorded in Scripture. We know on the basis of a lot of contemporary scholarship that while traditional authorship has been assigned to these very important figures, that oftentimes there are portions of the Old Testament that we are simply not aware who exactly wrote it, even if they were ascribed to these major figures like Moses and David and Isaiah.
So how did it come into existence?
It started through storytelling. The best that we can gather, maybe about 4,000 years ago, about the time that the patriarch Abraham had been called by God out of what is now present-day Iraq, and to travel to a land that he did not know. From then, the stories began about God's interaction with Abraham's family and lineage, and the people that came from them, the people of ancient Israel, the people from whom Jesus Christ came. And from storytelling, there emerged the recording of events like the call of Abraham, stories about the creation, the Exodus in Egypt, the wilderness wanderings, the establishment in Cana, where the promised land. And then from royal decrees, once God's people were set up with their own government, then sayings of prophets that were either written down during their lifetime or after that, as well as recording of wisdom figures like Solomon in books like the Proverbs.
Do we know at what point it was bound into book format?
And I'm sorry if I keep like stopping like this, but any questions, anything like, oh, why did he say this? Or like, what does he mean by this? Or you can just like, the usual either, ask or raise your hand, because I only can, like I said, I can only see 2 or 3 of you. Okay.
Sam, you want to say something?
Maybe Sammy just joined us now. That's why.
Okay. Okay.
I just joined. Hi, everybody. Sorry for being late.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Sam. Not a problem.
Father, I want to ask something. Why Joseph story is not mentioned, and it's a major story, and a lot of study says that it points to Jesus Christ. Okay, Joseph is one of the 12.
Well, of course, yeah, the youngest, and then he became, sure.
Yeah, then his brothers tried to kill him. They sold to Potiphar. They went to Egypt, and he became,
kind of like there was the prime minister basically for Pharaoh. But like, what are you trying to see? It wasn't mentioned. What do you mean wasn't mentioned?
In the Old Testament as one of the once we mentioned you mentioned the major or minor prophets,
okay,
and stories, and to me Joseph's story is really teaches a lot about who Christ is.
Sure, but what we're not saying, but in the end, Joseph did not have his own book. And when we say major and minor, that it doesn't, we're speaking about like people who wrote about it, Joseph was written about, if we can say. So of course it does not take any import. I mean, the life of Joseph, and as we read in the Holy Week, Holy Monday, we read this kind of like Christ and being Joseph of the New Testament, because the way he was treated. But like when we say major and minor, because Joseph did not have his own book, we're referring to prophets who wrote about something. Joseph did not write. It was written about him that he did. And honestly, there are a lot of question marks, not to like to steer something, but like, how come, like, what does that mean? There was never ever historically that you can prove that the pharaohs or the Fara'ine, or Pharaoh people or the Egyptian allowed anybody who's not from their race in a way to take any higher position. How come this one time did happen? Although some other will tell you, well, there was a time that they, anyway, I don't, every single thing of these, we can literally, there are books. And don't forget the New Testament, the 4 Gospels are talking about something that took place in 33 years, the birth, between the birth of Christ and his death. Old Testament is basically talking about 2,500, at least 2,500 years of event that took place. So, but okay, that's anyway. Any other questions, or we shall. So she was. I'll just return like a couple seconds and then.
Sayings of prophets that were either written down during their lifetime or after that, as well as recording of wisdom figures like Solomon in books like the Proverbs.
Do we know at what point it was bound into book format and disseminated to the masses?
We don't have any reliable record with exactitude, but the best that we've been able to establish with the result of a lot of contemporary scholarship, as well as ancient wisdom, is that the first and most significant part, traditionally, the Torah or the law, really came into being in the Babylonian exile about 580 years before Christ was born.
Forgive me,
there were other writings of prophets, recordings of the kings, chronicles, and wisdom. came about in ensuing, that were finalized in centuries that followed in exile.
Who are the most important figures in the Old Testament?
So forgive me, I did say the Babylonian 870. It's 580. Forgive me for this. And now he's talking about the most important figures. She's asking who are the most important figures in the Old Testament.
Without a doubt, the most important figures would be Adam and Eve, the first created human beings, then Noah, above all, Abraham as the first called of God's people and the father of all believers, David, the first king of Israel, Moses, the prophet and lawgiver, and the prophet Isaiah. Those would be the greatest of the figures of the Old Testament.
What are some of the most important events to come out of the Old Testament?
Without a doubt, the event of the Exodus from Egypt is the event of the Old Testament. It is the time when God's people had been oppressed for hundreds of years in Egypt, and they were liberated by a God who finally heard their prayers of cry out of this oppression to lead them through Moses, through many acts of deliverance, to cross the Red Sea, to go through the wilderness wandering, to inherit the promised land. After that, the most significant event would be the Babylonian exile, when God's people, the southern kingdom of Judah, were taken into exile about 580 years before Christ was born, because that was the greatest tragedy that ever happened. And from those events, or rather I should say in between those events, the most significant thing would have been the establishment of kingdom and kingship with David, because David as Messiah, which refers in the Old Testament not to a future figure, but to a reigning anointed king to govern his people in this world, in this life. From that time, from that establishment, comes the dynamic of who is Messiah that will finally fulfill David and finally bring God's rule and reign in this life.
What books do you believe are the most important when it comes to studying the Old Testament?
Okay. Any other questions about this before we listen about who are the major books of the Old Testament? We shall continue then.
In my estimation, the books of Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, the Psalms, and Isaiah would be the most important parts of the Old Testament for us.
And why?
Genesis lays the foundations of creation, of what it means to be human, of the original state in which we're created, how we corrupted and lost that great privilege, what God kept doing to restore and heal us to our promised inheritance, and how that works itself out through the call of Abraham and his successors, his descendants, Isaac and Jacob, and the people of Israel. Exodus, because it records the call of Moses, the deliverance of God's people from the Exodus, and the beginning of the movement to Promised Land. Deuteronomy, because it's the summary of God's teachings and commandments that establishes how they are to live forever, and includes many important things that look towards taking possession of the Promised Land and living as a settled people. The book of Psalms, because that's the most quoted in the New Testament, and it is the heart of Orthodox worship, and is the book of prayer from which we learn how to pray. And Isaiah, because he's considered by the great fathers of the church to be the fifth evangelist, because from that book more is gleaned and pertains to the life, and especially the passion, death, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
The New Testament seems to have a feeling of love and compassion. These are the teachings of Jesus. In the Old Testament, God seems vengeful and angry. Why is that?
I think that's a very, now it's always, we have this kind of this question, and that's why I spoke a couple of weeks ago that we actually have in the beginning of the early church, we had some heresies by denying Marcion, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Marcion heresy, which denies the Old Testament. Basically, that was just wrong book, and they wanted to like burn it, basically have nothing to do with it. But the church, early church, says no, we still can learn from the Old Testament, although if there is this kind of language, and he gives actually a great answer. You'll hear.
The Old Testament records a far longer period of history than does the New, and includes God's revelation at a particular time and place for particular people. So therefore, it does not contain the fullness of all that God has to reveal. But while there are times where God does appear to be angry and vengeful and wrathful, there are many other portions of the Old Testament that are simply not known, where God is extraordinarily loving and compassionate and forgiving. The Old Testament, over a much longer period of time, was written where God's people, were in circumstances that involved warfare, conquest, dealing with hostile powers, dealing with foreign religious traditions that were alien and threatening to their own viability as the unique, separated people of God. The New Testament, by contrast, deals with the fullness of revelation through Jesus, the Messiah or Christ, a much shorter period of time, and involves a time where God's people do not have control of society or an ability to defend themselves in some military fashion, or to manifest their own desires when threatened through ways other than suffering and persecution.
You just brought up you had brought up Genesis, and I wanted to ask you about an issue that some theologians bring up with Genesis, even some lay people, that there are two different creation stories. Explain what the differences are.
Well, people typically refer to Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 as two different creation accounts. They both differ in terms of language and content and even thrust. However, the best way to understand them now is to see Genesis chapter 1 as setting the theological, spiritual parameters and outline by which to understand the more specific story in Genesis chapter 2. So we learn different theological and spiritual lessons from each, understanding chapter 2 not to be separate from chapter 1, but rather a further refinement and detail of what chapter 1 provides on a larger scale.
Well, explain to us the differences.
Well, the differences include that God speaks and creates by a word alone in chapter 1, whereas in chapter 2, he's working with material, clay, to form human beings. In chapter 1, there is a great deal of attention to the creation involving water, whereas in chapter 2, there's a great attention to dry land. There are different, in chapter 1, God creates human beings, male, female, instantaneously at the same time. Whereas in chapter 2, God creates the man, Adam, first, then from him creates the woman, Eve. Some of the differences between the two. And
so which one are we to digest, to believe?
Both. Because chapter 2 gives us detailed information that one simply doesn't provide. And because our ancient Hebrew ancestors who provided us these inspired stories were simply not as concerned as maybe we American Christians might be in having everything to be completely harmonized, they had no problem with distinct and different angles of the creation story, just like they had with different angles of the flood account or of the establishment of kingship later in the Bible, where you've got details that don't always fit together, but they're part of a wonderful, multifaceted story that has different angles to it that can all just be harmonized, squeezed into one nice, neat narrative.
Anything here that you might have a question about? I mean, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's very, yes, تفضل أستاذ.
So I'm listening and to the difference. Like he said, the Old Testament is God is angry and there's violence. Right?
Well, but you heard him not all the time, and don't forget, this is like a course of like literally almost 3,000 years, or at least 3,000 years of things. So, yes.
So, but honestly, everything I read, I mean, any of the books the books that we see in the Old Testament, it's all kind of the same theme. There's blood, there's wars, there's violence. God intervenes in a violent way, and so on. Then we go to the New Testament, and it's completely the opposite.
Mm.
Okay, so the two books to me don't harmonize. Even the teachings of Christ, when he says, you know, you were told that in the past, this is what you learned. I'm telling you, it's different. When somebody eye for an eye, and I'm telling you now, you turn the other cheek. It's like I'm doing what was done in the Old Testament. I try to connect the two, and they don't connect for me.
Sure. And I appreciate that, but also don't forget what Christ has done too. We focus a lot in the Old Testament because there's more of God's rage, if I can say, or anger. And then in the New Testament, we see more of God's like love and sacrifice, but we forget to see the other two sides in other books. So in the Old Testament, we see how God is so merciful. And if you remember from the feast of Saint Elias, I did speak at the end of it that basically God, after Elias basically, killed all these other priests from different, God was not happy. God was not happy at all because it was not like necessary to do this. And then Elias really runs and escapes, thinking that he's going to escape God. And then he runs to the mountains and to hide basically. And then he realizes, and he was expecting, God's rage. And then first thing, I think he gets the fire, and then there's a huge fire, and he thought God is gonna somehow hurt him, and God is gonna be in this fire to hurt him, but God was not in the fire. And then the second thing was the earthquake, a huge earthquake, and he thought like now he's gonna die. It wasn't nothing. And then the third thing is, and then when he was like literally, he met God in a way with a small breeze, and God was basically came through a small breeze, like gentle. He came gently to him to kind of like tell him like he did wrong, but he still showed compassion about him and forgave him. On the other hand, in the New Testament, we see places like, Christ saying, well, if you look at a woman, you'd better take your eye off. And it's a harsh language. That's not God who's telling us, I'm compassionate, loving, I'll forgive you. He's telling you like, might as well poke your eye out. Or when he went to when he showed up to the temple and he saw the people dealing with money and stuff, he didn't say, oh, well, you know what? Can you please close your shops and leave? No, he flipped tables, So there is like this side of God that we'll also see in the New Testament, that he was not, this always like, oh, loving, that he stood up, like when he stood up in the, in front of Pilate and told him basically as if like, I don't care who you are, So don't forget, it's 30 years or 33 years, or actually not even, I mean, it's literally when Christ, 3 years at the end, the gospel is about like 3 solid years of Christ's ministry against 2,500, 3,000 years. But also, like Father Harry said, don't forget, there's a lot going on, like, as in history at that point. That's the life that it was, it's a life of like fighting, conquering, defense and all of this that required these things. And that's what the people understood. If God right away showed up with like, turn your left cheek once you're hit with your, once you get, you're hit with your right cheek, if you get slapped on your right cheek, turn the left cheek, most of the people would have probably not, accepted him like his own people, because it would have been such a great difference in something that is never like, custom to that time. So God had to work his way gradually by allowing things maybe that is not typical of him or as we know him in Christ. But then it was all like, it's like basically somebody in second grade, when you want to teach them math, you don't want to hit them right away with materials from college. You're going to work their way, you're going to work your way up introducing math to them little by little, or else you're just going to lose them and then they're going to listen. You know what I mean? So that's how I see it.
Father, also just a comment. I believe God at that time, he was dealing with idols. He wasn't with pagans. He was not dealing with people they did not know his ways till he gave them the commandments, and they start being aware, and he called Israel his people. So at that time, he was dealing harshly with people because they did not believe in him. They were worshiping idols and pagans. So
No, but before they exited Egypt, they knew of God and they worshipped God. They were Jews at that time.
only the Jews, but he was dealing harshly with anybody who came against him because he wants to establish
Well,
with them.
well, both of you, in a way, yes and no, because we get to a point after when they were wandering in the
Desert.
desert, and Moses goes to talk to God, and he comes back, and what does he see? They already made, basically, the Jews started making idols, and to worship in a way, and then they wanted kings and all of this. So the point is, it was God in a way like had to be a teacher teaching, going kind of to the level of the people. He had to deal with what he has to deal, and then to get them out. It's basically that what we say, Christ went down to death to raise us up. He wasn't like stayed up and says, you'd better do this or else I'm going to give up on you. He's like, no, he came down, put his hand in with us, and then lift us up. And that's how God did in the Old Testament. He couldn't just be out of the blue teaching them things and expecting things from them that he just like, people were not aware of this. That totally there was nothing like this, of like this kind of love, this kind of self-sacrifice. We see it individually, like we see, what Joseph did, or what Abraham and with his son Isaac, all of this we see what, but in general, God had to do what he had to do, or allow some of these things, just because he needed, in the end, he was looking forward, like to the end point, and knowing that's how he can gradually get them to where he wants them to be.
The difference that I see between the Old Testament and the New Testament is that in the Old Testament, God is presented as favoring, a group of people. He came to their aid. But in the New Testament, there is no talk at all of saving, a group of people. We're totally, completely individuals, and each one is, hanging in his own thread. And there is really, the Ten Commandments are there for individuals, but there is no continuity in terms of God helping a people. It's salvation is by individual, which is a big jump for me.
Sure, but Salib, and what you said is so true. And that's how kind of like Christ gradually started. He says, "Well, I came here to the lost sheep. I came here to the people of Israel." I don't forget with the Canaanite women when she told him, "Please heal my daughter," and he's like, "Who are you?" And she's like, "Well, my daughter is sick," and he's like, "Well, I'm not here for you. You're not one of our people." So, but then we see, what did he end up telling the disciples after his resurrection? He says, "Go baptize who? Go baptize all nations." And then but also gradually he had to show, in the end of the day, Christ came up from a Jewish, Jewish family, Jewish culture, Jewish religion. And then, but he had to like show them step by step, by in the beginning telling them, "Well, I came for the lost sheep. Your judgment is much harsher than other people's judgment." And then he starts saying, "Well, I'm not here for only you. I came here for everybody." And that's what I also got them, and then when we have the readings and writings of St. Paul, and all of these things. But definitely there is this gradual thing from God's people in the Old Testament, like specific group of people, specific, group of people, like I said, but then it became to like everybody. Again, there's this gradual kind of like, gradual work of God, that he couldn't just right away, boom, comes up like, first thing first, like, oh, Adam and Eve, mess up. Oh, let's send Christ right away. No, there was kind of a process. And then there's like gradually, work, had to be done in order for Christ to come. And then after Christ, gradually some work to be done to say no, it's about the whole world, not about just because I created you all in the image of me, in my image and likeness. And it wasn't like I created the Jewish people, or this group of people just a different way than other people.
Yeah, John 3:16, whomsoever, not a certain individual or any, so.
But again, anyway. So I don't remember what it was. Let's see what the question was, and then
some of the stories from the Old Testament seem to defy reality. For example, Methuselah living to the age of 1,000, Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. A lot of people question the story of Noah's Ark. How are we to take these? Which stories are reliable, which are not?
Understanding the Old Testament today involves us knowing what kind of literature we're reading when we read the Old Testament itself, since it's composed over many centuries and involves many different kinds of writing. I will compare this to how we would read a newspaper today. If we pick up a newspaper, it would be disastrous to read an editorial the same way we'd read a news report, or a comic strip the same way we'd read an advertisement. So in the Old Testament, we have different kinds of writing. And the earliest chapters of Genesis, chapters 1 through 11, are typically sacred stories that are inspired by God, but are not the same as historical accounts in the books of Samuel and Kings about the rise of Saul and David and Solomon and the establishment of the kingdom and the kingship. So therefore, when we read about Methuselah as a great descendant of Adam and Eve living to be 1,000 years old, we must understand that this is part of sacred story, not a part of history writing. So there is a symbolic way of understanding that doesn't necessarily have to read it as a literal 1,000-year life cycle, but understands how the life cycles diminish over time because of the impact of sin, and that God eventually establishes a life cycle, upper limit of about 120 years, only to preserve us, human beings, falling into greater sin because of longer life spans. And that, by contrast, the ancient story of Methuselah compared to the ancient Babylonian creation myths is far more reliable, because in the ancient Babylonian myths that predate our sacred stories, the lifespans were 20, 30, 40, and 50,000 years, and these were much less. With Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt, once again, we have very ancient stories, and it's simply impossible for us to know some degree of what actually happened in history, though that may not even be the most important part, because history is not just a matter of what happens, it's a matter of how we understand it.
Sure.
And the way we understand history is significant in Scripture, so that there is no story in the Bible without interpretation and understanding that's inspired by God's Spirit.
There is a lot of history documented in the Old.
Any question about this? Also, we do know that, of course, the calendar was not the same, or like now, our yearly calendar is 365 days. Back in the older days, it was much shorter. I don't know exactly, but like basically every 3 months, what it is for us now, like now 3 months or 4 months could be considered a whole year back then, that we just have to restart, or start a new year. So if I'm like 40 years old now, technically, if I want, if in the old days it used to be the whole year is what's now 3 months, I should be 4 times that I should be 160 years old then. If the year is not 12 months, is only 3 months. So, but also part of it is he brings a very good theological point, like maybe God was like, okay, people should live in a way less. That's a very interesting point that he brings, just because he doesn't want us to sin more.
The Old Testament stories about kings. Why should that matter to us?
It matters because all the stories of God's people are foundational to us understanding who we are as Christians today. It would be the same as if I were to visit you, and let's say there would be a death of a loved one in the family, and everyone would be around talking about stories of what that person meant in their life. So just as I could not get a sense of who a relative of yours might be without the stories told about person, character, places, people, events, humorous, sad, boring in the middle. So for us as believers, all of the stories of our spiritual ancestors, the ancient Israelites, the apostles, the great fathers of the church and the saints, is all important because it helps inform us as to how we are today. And we learn a great deal from both things they did well in faithfulness to God, things they didn't do well. And so it's all written and inspired for our moral instruction, even today, just as the apostles taught us.
Does the Orthodox Church honor the great figures of the Old Testament? And if so, how?
Emphatically, the Orthodox tradition has honored all the Old Testament figures as glorified saints, right along the apostles of the New Testament and the martyrs, the church fathers and the great ascetics, with feast days. And above all, this is especially apparent on the Sunday before Christmas, when, in the Matins or Orthros service, in the Synaxarion or commemoration, we read all the Old Testament ancestors of Christ, from Adam and Eve, all the way through the patriarchs and matriarchs, the kings and queens, including the prophets and prophetesses, because they were women prophets, and the righteous and noble figures, up to his own parents, Mary and Joseph.
Do we know how important the Old Testament was for Christ?
We do. We have a sharpened understanding of this. Jesus would have grown up in a very devout Jewish household. In that household in Nazareth, he would have been instructed by the Theotokos, the Virgin Mary, on a daily basis about who we are as a people, the stories of the patriarchs, Abraham and the rest, of the Exodus, of the kings, David and Solomon, of the judges like Samuel, of the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah. Jesus would have attended synagogue faithfully every Saturday. He would have heard the Old Testament Psalms. He would have heard the prayers. He would have heard sermons. He would have heard readings from the Torah, from the prophets. It would have informed his life from the inside out, so that as he emerged into adulthood, the Old Testament, which was the only Bible he would have known, was inside his mind and his heart, operating through all of his ministry.
And how did he incorporate the Old Testament in his ministry?
Well, we have an example in the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 through 7 of Matthew, where he explicitly is referring to having come not to destroy the Torah, the commandments and the stories of God people enshrined in the first 5 books, but rather to fulfill them. We also have examples of how he takes the commandments of the Old Testament and radically internalizes them, so that it's no longer simply a break in one's relationship with God to commit adultery in actual fact externally, but now even thinking about it internally breaks our relationship with God. He referred to Old Testament figures in his first sermon back in Nazareth, where he grew up. In Luke chapter 4, he refers to the prophets Elisha and Elijah and things that they did. He is praying the Psalms even as he's dying on a cross, Psalm 22. And his entire ministry focused on the inbreaking kingdom absolutely has everything to do with what the Old Testament says about who God is, who we are, what the creation is all about, and how God wants to organize our life in this world.
I know some Christians who have never even cracked open the Old Testament. In fact, that you can buy copies of the Bible.
Any questions, any comments, anything on this part? And that's basically what we were kind of like talking about, the relationship between Old Testament and New Testament, and Christ, how he looked at both in a way, or at least how he looked at the Old Testament and interpreted it and showed us the new way of interpreting the Old Testament.
Just the New Testament. How important is the Old Testament to us as Orthodox Christians?
Following what the apostles and the fathers have taught, I would say it's of critical importance, because the New Testament is written out of the raw material of the Old Testament. And the gospel stories of Jesus are precisely in understanding Jesus on the basis of the Old Testament. So therefore, without understanding the Old Testament, we can't understand the New. We will misunderstand the New Testament. We will misunderstand liturgy, epistle, gospel, and the hymns of the church. Whereas the better we understand the Old Testament, the better we understand the New, and vice versa. The New Testament reveals and helps understand and interpret the Old Testament in ways that could never have been anticipated until the Messiah finally showed up in the person of Jesus of Nazareth.
I think you talked about this already, that we use during one service, we talk about some of the people throughout the Old Testament. Do we use other passages from the Old Testament in our worship as Orthodox Christians?
The backbone of Orthodox worship is the book of Psalms. It's everywhere, in the daily offices of the hours, in the Vespers, in the Matins. It's supposed to be in the liturgy, but it dropped out for the most part centuries ago, and we need to recover it, except for some little verses that are sometimes chanted at the antiphons. The Psalms is the book that schools us in how to pray, and my heartfelt conviction as a pastor of 28 years is most of us don't really know how to pray deeply enough. And the Psalms needs to be the way in which we recover that. Athanasius the great church father, said, only through the book of Psalms can we put on Christ and actually assume how we've been baptized and grow up into the Lord. So that's critical. Second book after that is the book of Isaiah, which comes up in the gospel story so much of Jesus, and comes up in some of the services of the church, especially when we read Old Testament at the great feast days, Christmas, Epiphany, and above all, Holy Week and the Easter celebration.
Since you have been a pastor for 28 years, I'm sure you've led many a Bible study. What is the number one question you get from people about the Old Testament?
Why do we have to read this anyway? Can't we just stick with the New Testament? It's so much shorter. It's so much easier. It's so much more appealing to me. That's probably the most common question.
And what led you to take such a fascination with it, to be so fascinated by it?
We don't need to
When
hear
I was
it.
a theological student here on campus that do advanced studies in the Old Testament, because nobody ever does that.
Had you thought of that even before they mentioned it?
Never. It was a revelation to me. So I began taking a course in Hebrew in the summer at Harvard Divinity School and hated it for 1 week. Love with the Hebrew language, and our affair has never ended.
I've never heard anybody say an affair with the Old Testament. And I will say that the Old Testament is very difficult to read, not only because of its length, but because of the various names and so begat so-and-so. Why is all of that important?
All of it's important because since the Christian faith is so radically founded on the person, Jesus Christ, and the gospel message proclaimed in his faith, above all, is suffering, crucifixion, death, and resurrection. And the life of Jesus Christ is profoundly intertwined with the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. Therefore, all of those things that informs who Jesus was is now important for us, because it not only informed who Jesus was, what his purpose and mission in life was, but he also changed the way we see the Old Testament. He gave us new eyes to do this so that it becomes now relevant, meaningful, impactful, and energizing in ways for us that would never have been possible without him.
It seems there are different versions of the Old Testament for different denominations, different Christian denominations. Why is that? What are the differences?
Well, there are, on the one hand, different translations of the Old Testament, just of the New. Hundreds, if not thousands, many of which can be very reliable and useful because they all highlight different things. Of the original languages, Hebrew and Aramaic in the Old Testament and the Greek translation, there are different versions that are read by Christians today, including different versions by Protestant Christians primarily, or by Roman Catholics, or by Orthodox. Some of those differences have to do with the fact that, at least for us Orthodox, there has never been a conciliar definition about what exactly the limits of the Old Testament is. We have shorter canons of 39 books, longer canons of even up to 52 books of the Old Testament.
Isn't it generally considered 49 books?
Well, it is by some, but it's not universal, because once again, we've never had a conciliar definition. There's a very common designation of it being 49 from a version of the Septuagint, the Greek translation, but there's a different version the Ethiopians use or the Slavic churches have used. And there are simply there are different of opinions in the church fathers about what the number of the Old Testament books is. So while we share 39 basic books with Roman Catholics and Protestants, there are additional books that are called readable in our tradition, anaginoskomena, that we read for profit, even if they may not have the same authority as the main 39. But then again, we share all of those with Roman Catholics with some slight differences. So we have more in common with those readable books with the Catholics than we do with Protestants, but even Protestants are beginning to rediscover them and incorporate them back in their Bible because of the richness of what comes from the teaching of these extra books.
Well, you've been a very enthusiastic supporter of the Old Testament. If somebody is interested in learning more about it, are there resources available for them? What would you say they should read? Obviously, the Old Testament, start from the beginning, probably. Other outlets for them?
Well, I would begin by emphasizing that there is nothing that replaces direct contact with the Old Testament itself. Through the worship of the church, the Psalms in prayer, public prayer, private prayer, the stories of the Old Testament as they come to us through the hymns of the church, the commemorations of the church. But for Christians to pick up and read the Old Testament on a regular basis is very dear to my heart and very important for spiritual growth, irreplaceable. Along with that, there are growing resources in English for people. There are the resources of the writings of the fathers of the church that are increasingly being translated. There are writings of good contemporary scholarship that make the biblical resources available in ways that we wouldn't have prior to advances in archaeology and in biblical study that have occurred only in the last few hundred of years. Pastors now have a greater exposure through their education. There are the resources on the internet that are available. There are Orthodox writers writing commentaries increasingly on books of the Old Testament. All of these resources are going to be available increasingly in the coming years, so we have the benefit of them, but nothing replaces our own direct contact without all the other commentary on it.
Father Harry Pappas, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And please return to view the remaining programs in this series,
I
Discovering
probably should stop
Orthodox
it first
Christianity. You can find them at youtube.com/Greek.
Here we go. Well, that was, I thought we'll go to a source about somebody whose specialty is Old Testament. He's definitely one of, like I said, three main theologians, or if I can say, who have written commentaries and who studied the Old Testament in our contemporary world. There are, I'm sure we can find other talks, for Father Eugene Panchuk and Father Paul Tarazi. This one was short and, I like the questions. That's why I chose this one, to play. But also I wanted to make sure that we listen to not just, well, this is what the priest is saying, our parish priest is saying. So it's actually, this is what, in general, the Orthodox faith, what they teach and what they say about the topic. It's not like, maybe just our priest making this up, or just saying these things. But it's actually, that's what the whole church, in a way, in general, teaches and accept, regardless if that's, we believe this, or we might say, I'm not okay with this, or I don't think we should do this, or I don't think our faith is based on this or that. So it's always good to see what the outside world, and when I say outside, just outside of our own bubble, outside of St. George, church or community. It's good to see and learn and experience what other Orthodox jurisdictions and other priests from other other than your own priest saying these things. Any questions about Old Testament? Very good. Very good. Well, you better now start reading the Old Testament then. I mean, it's long. A lot of stuff it might challenge you. One examples, read Genesis 4. Genesis 4. That's one of my first shocks that I've growing up reading the Old Testament, and I was like, whoa, I thought everything that was written in the gospel, word by word in the Bible, that's is it. Everything is accurate, everything is just like exactly what happened. And then things like one of the first things that kind of shocked me when I read Genesis 4, it says Cain knew his wife. Cain, the son of Adam and Eve, knew his wife and had children. And I was like, hold on a second. The whole creation, it says, I mean, the whole 3 chapters before, it says Adam and Eve got together, they had Cain and Abel, and then that's it. And then all of a sudden, Cain now has a wife. It's like, where the heck this woman came from? Like, well, that doesn't say anything. And that's why we need to understand that there are things. First of all, we're done through hundreds and centuries. When we say God created, in one day, that does not mean that God created literally in a 24-hour span that he created something. So the point is, maybe God created more than Adam and Eve. We don't know, but what we're given is what we need to know. Um, so so there are a lot of things that we might read, and like Father Harry mentioned, especially when it comes to talking about like in the history part of the Old Testament, if you really put things together and like add up like the events, some of the events just like don't make sense that they took place. Or like how come this person, it was says, you know, he's 900 years, although he's the grandfather of somebody, but then it seems that as if his son was born before him. In all of these, like, you get things like they don't make sense, but at the end of the day, we need to understand them as, in the end, what's the point of the story, and not exactly take word by word. This is what our Protestants, the Christian Protestants, fails sometimes to accept and understand, that they just want to take it word by word. And when word by word we take it, it cannot apply to us here, because like we say always, and we repeat this, and it has to be known to us and accept this, that it is not, the Bible is not a book that was just thrown at us, that it was somehow written by God, and then he just like handed to us, handed to the prophets, handed to the Old Testament people, and then the New Testament people took their part. And we truly believe that it was a book that it's written with, and it's a humans who wrote it with an inspiration, a divine inspiration. And we cannot ignore the fact that when it was written affected by the historical and event and the culture of that, the time that it was written. That might be new to people now, that might be a shock to some people, but that's a reality we need to accept and live with it. In the end of the day, like Father Harry said, it's not about the events itself. History is not about what happened, it is about what we learn from what happened and the lessons that we learn from what happened. So it will be always the Old Testament, kind of like a controversial thing, because a lot of it we just don't know for sure. We just don't have a lot of info about it. But what we do know is we believe in the church fathers and mothers who explain to us through their divine inspiration that this is what we know about. And we believe that the church, who lives a life in the church, somehow God can reveal to him or her about the Old Testament, about who God is and who God was in the Old Testament, or who God is in the Old Testament and who God is in the New Testament. But it also has to be acknowledged and approved by the church as a whole. I can't say, well, I fast all my, all the fasting, I fast all the days that I need to fast, and I pray, and God told me Old Testament is bad. It's just, no, that It's not like now, yes, we're going to believe you, or, just we need to look at everything through the eyes of the church as a whole, through the history. Anyway.
Any questions?
Mm-hmm. You can say why this, but you can't say, oh, I don't like, or I don't. No, I still think the Old Testament is just bad, or no. It's just we need to really understand, read more about it. I can give you a list of like 5,000 books in English now that we can, that it's just like questions and books and books about the Old Testament and interpretation.
Amir, you have a question?
Let me share the link with you of this video if somebody wants to re-watch it. I'm just gonna put it in the chat. I just put it in the chat. Whoever wants to download it, bookmark it, or whatever you want. Other than this, anything else? Well, yes, Jamal.
Nicolette, go ahead.
After Jamal, it's okay. After Jamal, it's okay. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
But the only book I read about the Old Testament is the only one, and still it talks about the privileges the Jews have with God, and and then it goes to a designed, planned, and they might have been so smart to look to the future to claim Palestine their land and all kind of things. So it's okay. It's a completion of the New Testament and the prophecies about Jesus and more of that, and it could be a little bit done better and easier and simpler.
So I did mention something. What I'm going to say now, I mentioned it before. Us people who are affected by what's happening, in the Middle East and the atrocity of Israel, and to our own people, especially in Palestine, we like even growing up in Lebanon, I know even my own people, like Old Testament, they don't even hear the word Israel. But they don't hear it mentioned. Old Testament was just something we don't even talk about. Why do we need it? Look what they've been, look these, people, what they're doing to us, But sometimes we get confused. We don't want to make the same mistake that they, and when I say they, the Jews, the Israelis now, the same mistake. We don't want to make the same mistake they've been making all these centuries. In the end of the day, when we talk about God's people, yes, they were chosen people, but they messed it up. And God did what he had to do and still acknowledged with Christ. And he told them, he told Pilate, it's not your fault. Like, I'm not mad at you, or I'm not like I have anything against you. I have against those people that I came for, and they betrayed, like they're not even, accepting me. So we should not look at it as much as it's very hard to say this, or like very hard to accept this. It's just like we have to, acknowledge it, as an Old Testament as a legit book with what Israel now, the state, is doing. There's no indication, we know also through the New Testament and through the explanation of Christ himself and the church after, there is no way that God intended for an earthly kingdom at the end for his people. Yes, maybe in the beginning, just again because he had to like go step by step with them, but no intention whatsoever, never intention that he wants to establish or establish a kingdom on earth. So anybody who claims that, Jews, but only, at least with the Jews, it's like that's what they, God forgive them, God bless them, but that's what they believe. But like, what's more worse is when you have Christians who claim, yes, like those Zionist Christians, if I can call, like they want to make sure that there's a state of Israel, because that's what Christ was about. And this is what we need to fight more. This is what we have, this is what we have a bigger problem with, because this is just totally wrong Christianity. And I cannot tell you, with all due respect, if you know somebody who's I don't know, like close with somebody that who's a Christian, but like believe in in the state of Israel. That is, they are so deviating from the Christian teaching of Christ. Unfortunately, that's there's a reality we have to deal with, but I hope this reality does not affect our look in the end and know what God intended in the Old Testament. Like I said, the Old Testament is the light that we look into to see the New Testament. And through the New Testament, we also see the Old Testament and understand what's happening. But again, if you look at our services, not, well, I want to say 90%, but like all our services have something from the Old Testament. Even some, like when you Orthros, the Matin service, almost half of it is from the Old Testament. The Divine Liturgy, like Father Harry said, lately we've been chopping things off. That's why we don't have as much as we had before. But Orthros, Vesper service, the hour services, all of these, like, the compliance services, all of this, literally 80-90% of it, well, 70-80% Old Testament stuff. So it is a crucial part of our life, Christian life, that we cannot deny or cannot like degrade. Although as much as it's hard that we have to say the words Israel in all of these things, during, but we do not mean, and we would never ever mean, we would never ever mean that like the current state and country of Israel. Rose, well, let me hear Nicolette's question first, and I'll answer you, Rose.
No, Abuna, you already touched upon it, but also the word Israel in the New Testament in particular, isn't that supposed to be the New Jerusalem and the new people? It's a people, not a state, not a country, not, yeah.
Absolutely. And even that was the problem. That's why Christ did not get that many supporters. Did you remember the Palm Sunday? He had thousands of people gathering because they thought, like, here's the new David, here's the guy with the sword that he's gonna like now kill. But then when they saw him sitting on a donkey and sitting this kind of like awkward sitting, like of like somebody who cannot fight, and then they realized what he's saying, that he's actually not going to fight. So they're like, see you later. They gave up on him. So we know that from the beginning that Christ never intended, for a earthly state, and only intended it as a kingdom. But by calling it the New Jerusalem, like Nicolette said, by calling it Israel as the new people, Israel as the new people of God. Okay, Rose asked a question, why have we been chopping out lately? I won't say lately, and I said lately, but I should have said it lately. But like we notice through history that every couple hundred years or so, we take some part, from the services. Like, yeah, let's drop this. Usually because of one main reason, when the church goes through wars, or it was oppressed, like when we had 500 years under the Ottomans, people could not spend a lot of times in the church because they had to work their butt offs because they had to pay taxes. So we couldn't spend that much time. But lately, we've been seeing that a lot of people like complain about time. And look at our churches. I mean, God, I feel like I'm blessed. For now, I haven't had anybody coming up to me and says that took too long. Maybe he is, or she's saying it to herself or to her, his family. I don't know. But like, I have not seen a riot, to like, Abuna went, 10 minutes more than usual, or like, this is unacceptable. Although I told you I can cut off services if I mentioned it once, I think. Yeah, I mentioned it once. I said, I will cut off services if you promise that anytime there's a Super Bowl or any football game or baseball game or anything that goes to overtime, you shut off the TV. And if you do that, if you say, well, I was only intending to watch this game for whatever time of it, like for football, whatever, soccer, 45 minutes, 15-minute break, and then another 45 minutes. So an hour and 45 minutes, anything above an hour and 45 minutes, shut off the TV, then I will chop off services. gladly. But I know that would never happen. None of us will say, I'm not going to watch the overtime and the Super Bowl or a game or anything. Anyway, but I feel very blessed not to. But we have churches that, and I know priests now, and always heard about priests struggling with their parishioners because they're complaining about length of services, so that the priest ends up, reading like skipping things, and then this skipping becomes like a routine, and then all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, we don't read the 6 Psalms in Orthros. Why? Well, somebody complained that Orthros was taking too long, and then now we kind of just like ignore them, and we just like jump for something else, and then out of this mistake, a tradition starts. Like, yeah, we haven't been doing them, for 10 years. Why should we keep doing them? Like, or why all of a sudden we need to return and do this? So what we have now is basically the product of, like, maybe I would say around a couple hundred years ago, that it was kind of like got downsized. God help us if another, I don't know, 50, 100, 20 years, more things can get chopped off. I hope not, and I pray not, but it seems that's it's always been like the case. Orthodox service, I'll give you an example. The Matin service, now we have it around like an hour and 5 minutes, an hour, 10 minutes, depending on the hymns that we have, the length of the hymns. Traditionally, Orthodox service should not take less than 2.5 to 3 hours of like things that had to be included. And I'm not talking about like Father John feeling, happy, and he wants to drag the petition, and Lord have mercy, he wants it to be 30 seconds. I'm talking about like, in peace, let us pray to the Lord, Lord have mercy. But the amount of hymnography, amount of hymns that they were included from the Old Testament as Psalms or Proverbs, and the hymns concerning a feast or a particular Sunday that they were added, and through the time they were like, instead of saying all of this, we're just going to say the first part of each, the first hymn of each part, and kind of ignore this. Maybe in monasteries they can do this, but in our parishes we don't want to do this. And that's now we end up with an Orthros that it's an hour and 5 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes. But it's been, it's typically like a 3 hour liturgy. It used to be before around 2.5 hours at least. Why? Because there were other things that they're, not only hymnography, there were a lot of movement. People will start outside, gather outside, and then there are rituals and practices that they have to do outside the church, and then they make a procession. And that's what we now have as the little entrance and stuff like this that we have. But it seems that at some point we'll get things chopped off, just following the trend, but it's very unfortunate. Yes. Everybody's happy? Well, on next Thursday, God willing, we will talk about the New Testament. Most likely I won't be able to join you just because I will be at camp. I don't know exactly the schedule at camp, but I will, communicate with Deacon Nicola. And in the following week, same thing, but I'll see, probably I'll have a better understanding of what we do on a Thursday night at camp. So if I can do it, I'm more than happy, because I'll miss your faces. I'm not used to I cannot just see you from one Sunday to another, So if I can, I will, I'll join you. If no, can't wait to, celebrate with you the Dormition Feast, God willing. Well, Sunday first, and then the Dormition Feast. It's August 6th it's Friday. Friday, August 6th is the Feast of Transfiguration, Eid al-Tajalli, or some churches might call it Eid al-Rab. I won't be here to do a liturgy for it, of course, or probably I won't be able to do it by the time I finish. So I would send an email, urge people, to either go to St. Peter and Paul or go online and watch services. On Sunday, then there's a tradition that we bless the al-inab, grapes. I don't know if you guys done before. As much as I like to do it on the feast day, me, I don't like to just push the feast to Sunday. But in this case, this year, I just can't, just because of where I'm going to be. And then I will bless, God willing, the grapes on Sunday, and we'll give the grapes at least something from the, a ritual from the feast itself. This Sunday, in 3 days, it's August 1st, and it's actually an interesting one because on August 1st is actually the third celebration of the elevation of the cross. So in it, we'll see something that usually not done till like maybe after like maybe 7-8 years, every 7-8 years to see that happening. But in it, I will do a procession at the end with a tray and the cross, and we're going to go to the middle of the solea, and then we just put it there, and then we sing hymns for the cross. It's just another 2 minutes. Just consider it, what is the extra time basically in the game that they had to, we'll do that, and I'll talk a little bit about it, what this feast is about. But don't forget, we're going to have a speaker, Stephen Cristoforo, who is talking to the young adult, God willing, on Saturday. I haven't checked today how many we have, but yesterday it was 32 people, 32 young adults. Glory to God. But then he will give us the sermon on Sunday too. Stephen Cristoforo, it's not just a random person, because we know in our churches no one should speak except basically clergy or people in seminary. He is a graduate of a seminary. He's basically can become a priest anytime, but his church found that he's more act or not active. He can be much more helpful when he's dealing with the youth and all of these things. He doesn't have to be a priest to do this, but he will address us on Sunday, God willing, and gives the sermon.
Further question, are we gonna bring in the masks back on through the whole entire church, or?
So, well, CDC, as of this morning, they did say starting Saturday, if it's mandatory for vaccinated and unvaccinated people to put the mask on.
Not the CDC, Abu.
Actually, in DC, actually, the mayor,
Washington DC government.
the mayor, yeah.
Yeah. Only the Maryland and Virginia are recommending it, but they're not enforcing it. Washington DC is enforcing the mask across the board, indoor and outdoor.
CDC in the end, we have to follow more of like the DC, that's why I said DC, but sure, the CDC issued that, and definitely the Washington DC, the mayor issued starting 5 a.m. on Saturday, we have to have masks. I will send an email probably tomorrow, just saying that this is a regulation. It's not about fighting it. It's not about like, now it's time for us to rebel. We just have to abide by these things because, it's not like our place to fight, nor to, and in the end, we pray, for that.
I'm tired now.
That they're making the right decisions, and that the doctors, and we trust the doctors as we trust our own doctors when.
There's nothing to fight. I mean, this. It is what it is. We have a pandemic, and it's getting back in gear, and it's
So I did have to deal with a individual who insisted, basically made a big fuss about it, about the masks, and how about he turned it right away political, and then we're cowards and all of this. And
Wow.
I told him that it is what it is. This is what we're doing. If you don't like that, you don't. There's nothing else to tell you. Well, the only thing, he also started attacking the hierarchy, and then we're just a bunch of words that he used that I don't need to repeat now, and all. And I was like, God bless you, but the way you're talking, you can definitely approach it in a different way. But the way you're talking, I'm taking your name out of the list. Come to church. The door will always be open as long as you come, peacefully, and you abide with whatever we have, the rules that we have. You are more than welcome. The second you start not doing this will have to deal with you. And that was like almost 2 months ago that I had to deal with it. But I mean, God bless him. There's no, it is what it is. You can do so much.
So, Father, this morning, or I guess early today, the mayor was also saying that actually children over 2 should be wearing the mask too. Are we gonna, I don't know if you heard that or not, but now we're gonna, I guess we have to follow that as well, right?
I mean, it is, but like, I don't, how can you tell a 3-year-old,
I
like,
know, that's exactly.
videos online that, people deny to go on airplanes because they're 3-year-old or whoever, kid did not want, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said that the rule, the guideline is 2 and over. Children under 2 years old, they don't have to wear a mask. The reason for this right now, they're saying that is because the new variant is attacking a lot of the children. But what we didn't see in the past, the last around, is a lot of the victims are children.
Mm-hmm.
And children under 2 are not going to be able. You're not going to be able to put a mask on them. But at least 2 years old, they understand they can keep a mask. But that's the reason why they're going. They're making the.
I mean, at least for young, for children, at the end of the day, standing shoes, they're not facing people. They're not going to people's faces. I don't know how much you can control. You know what I mean? It is going to be hard with the kids. It is.
Yeah.
This is what we have to follow. I don't know. I know this is going to start a whole new thing. I know Baltimore just sent St. Mary just yesterday. I think they sent an email to the parish basically saying we have to go back. This is what it is, and we have to go back to all of this. So we expect everybody. Coffee hour is only outside with very limited things that they're going to do. But basically, we're back a few months, but we're back as if like we're a few months back. I don't know. That's God help us. I mean, that point, like I said, vaccinated and unvaccinated people. So it's not like, where do you draw the line? Where do you, how much like there's, I mean, like what he said, there's nothing to fight. It's just like, what are you gonna do? People, I'm sure some people are going to be happy with it. Some people are not going to be happy.
Right.
Now no more coffee hour.
Well, I mean,
Probably.
If everybody's gonna be having masks, what are you gonna,
The whole point was to keep people, not only the guidance is to put the mask, but also to observe distancing.
Yeah. I mean,
so how do you have a coffee hour with people, with distance?
And then, putting the mask on, and then they can, how are they gonna eat without taking the mask? But like, I mean, in the end of the day, I think we learned a big lesson from from Christmas, at least in our church, with what happened. I think that's a good lesson to learn, that, there's a reality, and thank God nobody died. I know a church on the East Coast that had 3 or 4 deaths because of like negligence, literally negligence. And now there are talks about suings, lawsuits, and very serious things. They're not going to bring the people back, and there's still a tragedy of these 3-4 people died. I think 3. I don't know if it's anyway. But I think we learned a big lesson from our church. What happened. There's no reason to be repeated. It's not like, we can say that, well, it never happened here, and it's all fake. No, there is a reality that.
Somebody wants to rent home.
And then the other thing, also being outside and stuff, like, people then start calling, and we all know also the history with neighbors and stuff like this, that, but anyway, before we even go, we have the reality that we have to deal with. So.
Any other questions? Okay, Father, you want to close with a prayer?
Sure.
Unless you want to guys stay, it's 9 o'clock.
Yeah, I told you today 3.5 hours, right? That's it.
Okay, I'll stay. I don't.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. O heavenly King, comfort to the Spirit of truth, who art in all places and fillest all things, treasure of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us from every stain and save our souls. Gracious Lord, through the prayers of our holy fathers and the Holy Mother of God, have mercy on us and save us, for as much as he is good and loveth mankind. Amen.
Aye.
That